Well, good afternoon. I'm Joe Moreau. I'm the Vice Chancellor of Technology for the Foothill-De Anza District, and this is our April 2016 Town Hall meeting. This month's topic is information security, and we've done this for a couple of years now. We try to update it at least once a year because this is a field that's changing rapidly, and it's getting more and more dangerous all the time, unfortunately, because there's a lot of money in cybercrime, as you will see in a moment. But anyway, so to dig right into our topic today of information security, I thought we'd start with, well, why should we care? Information security, isn't that the IT department's responsibility to do all that for us? And yes, for the most part, it is a large part of our responsibility, but really and truly, it's everybody's responsibility, and hopefully I'll show you some examples that will reinforce that. But one of the things that I hope people will take away from this update of this topic is that it used to be for a long time that criminals would target institutions. They would try to break into our data centers or our servers or things of that sort, and they're really finding that it's easier and more profitable to attack individuals and trick them into giving up their credentials or providing access to their computer or any number of things. And it's easier and faster to break in to institutional systems, whether they be colleges or banks, if they can get an individual user's credential. And we'll see some examples of that today. But beyond that, I think everybody has a role in protecting the data that we store, and we store massive amounts of data, particularly on our students, but also on our faculty and staff. And that's why criminals want to break into our systems. They want to steal our data and use that data to make money. And they can make money with data in a couple of different ways. They can sell that data to other people who use it to make money, or they can use that to file fraudulent tax returns or take out credit cards in someone's name or loans or any number of things, or redirect bank deposits or any number of things. It's really about stealing data to steal money. That's what the bottom line is. On top of that, we also need to be highly vigilant with our information security so we don't lose the functionality of our network and our systems, because we'll talk about a new security threat called ransomware, which is becoming rapidly more popular with criminals and can take out an entire network. And what we certainly know is that when our network is not available, then people have a really hard time doing their job, whatever their job is. And so we want to make sure that those systems and resources are available to us optimally whenever we need them. And then finally, the law says we have to do this. So if nothing else here compels you to want to be vigilant with information security, well, the federal law says we have to do it. Certainly FERPA, the Family Educational Records Protection Act, says we have to do these things. We have to take precautions to protect student data. State law requires us to protect student and employee data, and many other laws require that as well. And on top of that, breaches can be very, very expensive, and I'll share with you just exactly how expensive we're talking about. But if we had a significant breach at our institution, whether it be just one college or the entire district, it would fiscally devastate us. So we do have breach insurance, and that would offset some of that cost, but it might not offset all of it. And so we want to, and that could have an impact on every single one of us that work here, and certainly on our students. So we'll talk about all these topics throughout the session this afternoon. Some major breaches, so just to give people an idea of what some of the things that have happened over the last couple of years and how many people they impacted and how much they cost. Here's some of the major breaches that have been in the news. Target, I think people heard about. This was a criminal used a contractor's credential to get into HVAC building management system and then use that to snake their way through their network and their infrastructure to get to their credit card point of sale system. So again, using an individual's credential. Home Depot, I can't remember the details on how that happened, but again, you're looking at 40 million customers, 56 million customers, 83 million customers, tens upon tens of millions of dollars of liability. Anthem Healthcare, many of us heard about that because many employees subscribe to their health insurance through Anthem. 80 million records lost in that one. Maricopa District, just in Arizona, another community college district, had a major breach a couple years ago, and they're still settling that. So far, they paid out $26 million in remediation costs. And last time I looked, there was a $6 billion class action lawsuit against the district, and that's like more than the entire budget of the state of Arizona. So not that they'll settle for $6 billion, but that's pretty frightening. So the latest threats. So these are the things we'll talk specifically about today. New on our list for this year is ransomware. This is really an ugly thing, and it has happened here at Foothill-De. I'll tell you about some of those circumstances. Phishing scams, this is really popular. We see these every single day, every single week. And I'll show you some examples of something that just came in last week. Covert data modification is another thing that has happened here at Foothill-De, and it's a real threat. And fortunately, no one has lost any money, but the potential for monetary losses to individuals is real, and it does happen. Social engineering is another big one that we'll look at. That especially people who are really, really busy serving students or taking care of our faculty and staff, they get some kind of contact and they're just like, oh yeah, that sounds logical and reasonable, let me just do that. And we need to pay really close attention to some of these things so we don't fall prey to criminals. And then of course, the tried and true malware and viruses are still a big deal and in our environment. And fortunately, we're doing a lot of things both at the system level, but certainly through a session like this to help people kind of combat these threats. So let's dig in. So ransomware, this is really one of the newest threats. You probably heard quite a bit about this in the media recently. There have been some very high-profile ransomware threats that have paralyzed companies or institutions. This is something that's spreading rapidly. And essentially, what the criminal strategy is here is a criminal goes in and paralyzes a system, and it could be a single desktop, it could be a server that connects many desktops or other client devices, or it could be an entire network. And the criminal takes over that and essentially freezes that system and says, if you pay me this much money, I will release your system. We've actually had that happen here at Foothill-De. We've had, fortunately, it's only happened to a couple of individuals who had their desktop computers were snagged by ransomware criminals. Fortunately for us, the people that tried it weren't the most sophisticated criminals on the planet. Criminals are not always known for being the smartest people in the world, but sometimes they are very smart. But we were able to recover those computers without actually having to pay any money. But it was certainly time-consuming for us and for the staff involved. It was certainly embarrassing for them, and really knocked them out of productivity for a whole day before we could get things back. So it does happen. It has happened here. So we need to be careful for it. So we'll talk about how ransomware kind of gets into the system and what it looks like in a minute. Phishing for hacker treasure. So this is the thing that we see most commonly across our systems, across our users. It mostly comes in through email, but these are fake emails that really are trying to get to two pieces of information: your username and your password. And a lot of times you'll see messages that say, Marty, your email box is overflowing, and in order for us to increase your storage allocation, click on the link below and go here and sign in and authorize us to do that. Well, of course, we would never, ever, ever ask you for your credentials via email. We just wouldn't do that, or even in person for that matter, but certainly not over mail or the phone. But if you surrender your username and password to a hacker, or some other kind of criminal, they will use that to access systems with your credentials and do bad things, whether it be change your direct deposit routing on your bank account, or change a student's grade if you have access to things of that sort. So that is one of the, protect your username and password if it were gold coins flowing out of a treasure chest, because that's really what criminals are looking for more than anything these days. And that's one of the things that allows them to get to places in our environment where they can launch ransomware attacks or other kinds of attacks. Covert data modification. So what this really talks about, what this threat is hackers get some kind of legitimate credential and then go into some sort of system, whether it be our student record system or a banking system or a finance system, and change people's information and do that for the purposes of stealing money. So this has happened here at Foothill-De Anza. A couple years ago, we were monitoring our payroll system and found out that about 13 faculty had had their direct deposit instructions changed and had their checks routed to some bank that wasn't their bank. And fortunately, we caught this before the next payroll cycle and were able to contact the people who were affected, and they said, no, I have not changed banks, I did not change my direct deposit. And so we were able to put that back. We also contacted the FBI. It was part of a significant investigation throughout the region, and we added 2 more levels of security to our direct deposit change form in Banner or in my portal in a way that we believe pretty solidly that only the actual employee themselves could now change that direct deposit instruction, because it requires other information that really only the employee would have. So it does happen, it happens here. Fortunately, nobody lost any money. We caught it all before it did any damage, but it is real. We have, over the last 2 years, 2 tax years, we have had several employees report that they received letters from the IRS saying that fraudulent tax returns had been filed in their name, and that they now have all kinds of restrictions on how they can file their tax returns going forward until the IRS completes these fraud investigations. So last year we had at least 3 people that I know of who had fraudulent tax returns filed in their name, including our retired chancellor, Linda Thor. She was a victim. This year, there have been at least 5 that I know of where people had their personal information stolen from somewhere. Might have been Anthem, although we haven't found a direct correlation between the people who reported this and the people who have subscribed to Anthem. Could have been any number of places, but that is on the rise. So it is real, it does happen, it's happened here. We have to protect against it. So but that does happen with some regularity. Social engineering, this happened just last week. This appears to be, on the surface, an email from Brian Murphy, president of De Anza College, to Doreen Novotny, our vice chancellor of human resources, saying, Doreen, please send me a copy of all the 2015 W-2 forms for all of our employees. I need them for review. This happened just a week ago today, actually. So, of course, Doreen is pretty savvy and figured that this was probably not real. And so contacted us immediately, contacted Brian immediately. We contacted district police. They're filing, they're doing an investigation and updating the FBI. And this scam actually got reported on NPR last week too, so that's how widespread it was. But this is also a really good example of how you can examine, with just a couple of key pieces of information, examine a social engineering message like this. This is kind of a cross between phishing and social engineering, but you can examine this message and see and understand how to tell whether it's bogus. So a couple of things, some of the most obvious ones are that it says it's from Brian Murphy, but the return address is somebody named bsteiner288 at Gmail. Well, that's clearly not Brian. If he was actually going to send this request to Doreen, he would have sent it from Murphy Brian at FHDA or danza.edu. Hello, Doreen. How are you today? I need you to kindly send me the copy of 2015 W2 of all employees. So the grammar's a little clumsy here. You probably would, if it was really from Brian, he probably would say, please send me a copy of the 2015 W2 forms for all employees, blah, blah, blah. Misuse of a comma here. This would typically be a period. I need them in a PDF file. That grammar is also a little funky. This would also be a period, not a comma. Please make sure to have them attached and sent before the end of the day as I, lowercase. Need them to go for appropriate review. Well, so some clues in the body of that message that tell us that it's probably not from Dr. Murphy, who clearly knows how to write better than this. And on top of this, Brian Murphy would never identify himself as being from the district. He would always identify himself as being the president of De Anza College in Cupertino, not in Los Altos Hills. But whoever crafted this spent a lot of time trying to figure out who the president of De Anza was, who the head of HR was for the district, and included the district logo in this. So, I mean, this was really a concerted effort on someone's part to try to get a whole bunch of wage and social security number data to use probably for fraudulent tax return filings. So this stuff happens all the time. It's real. That is the evidence from last week. But there's all kinds of other social engineering scams, like we hear people call our offices or call the help desk frequently and say, hey, I just got a call from somebody that said they were from ETS and they wanted my username and password for blah, blah, blah. And I didn't give it to them, but I thought you should know. I mean, that happens frequently. We have a lot of folks who come on campus and say they're from AT&T or they're from Verizon or they're from Comcast, and they want access to our network closets or things of that sort. Now, most of the time, almost all the time, they're real people. They really are from AT&T. They really are from Comcast. Hi. They really are from whoever they say they're from, and they're legitimate and they're here to do work. They usually just don't tell us that they're coming. But thankfully, most of the people who have access to those facilities have gotten used to calling us and saying, hey, there's a guy here that says he's from AT&T, should I let him in? And the answer is always no, you should never let them in. We need to escort them so that we know what they're doing, because we don't want them accidentally messing with some of our equipment that could take us offline or something like that. But there's all kinds of social engineering scams, but this is a fresh one that came in just last week. Malware and viruses are still a huge source of bad stuff that happens. A lot of it comes into our environment through email attachments. So people will send messages to folks in our environment, usually employees, that say, oh, here's that document you wanted. Sorry it took me so long. So they use a little bit of social engineering with a malicious attachment on email to try to get you to open it, because opening that document then will launch whatever the malicious application is contained in the Word document and probably infect your computer. It may plant things like keystroke capture software, so it looks for any time you go to fill in a username and password and captures that, and then sends it off to somebody, reports back to a computer and says, here's Marty's username and password for this, for my portal, or for what have you, or for his Exchange account, things of that sort. So malicious code is coming in all the time on Word documents attached to email and other kinds of files attached to email that are designed to trick you to open it, going, oh, that must be, you might see an email from somebody that you know that you might be expecting something from, and accidentally open it. So the other place where people get a lot of viruses and other kinds of malicious stuff is in what are called drive-by infections. And so what that really boils down to is perfectly legitimate websites. Something that you might go to for any number of things, another college or university, a nonprofit organization, a small bank or credit union, things of that sort, may actually have been, that legitimate website may have been compromised by a criminal, and they have implanted in that software that anybody who goes there automatically gets infected just by viewing that very legitimate website. So these are not coming from people surfing pornography or other kinds of things that would be inappropriate in a work environment. These are coming from absolutely legitimate websites who have been compromised. They don't know they've been compromised, or they don't have enough staff to monitor that kind of thing. And malicious code is being loaded onto your computer simply by viewing that website. And that comes in on a fair number of computers on a regular basis. So there's all kinds of attack vectors for malware and viruses that we have to watch out for. So what are we doing about this? What is ETS doing about this to help protect everyone, our students, faculty, and staff who use these systems? Because a lot, individuals can only do so much. A lot of this has to really be done at the enterprise level or at the district level. Well, we're doing quite a bit, actually more than we'd like to, because some of it's pretty expensive, but it's unfortunately very necessary. So one of the things that we've spent a fair amount of time and money on is network and server security upgrades. So we put in a whole variety of new systems to catch malware and suspicious activity before it becomes a problem for anybody. So what are some of these things that we're doing? So as email is probably the #1 source of bad stuff, we have put some very sophisticated appliances on our email server that watch the email traffic that comes in and looks for known bad stuff. So is this an email that came from a known bad location, or does it have an attachment with a known bad thing in it? So we use a product called Proofpoint, the company here in the Valley. It's really one of the best security appliances in the business, and it keeps an eye on our email traffic and does a couple of things. So if it sees an email that's from a known bad site, it automatically quarantines that. So some of you probably get, on an occasional basis, an email from Proofpoint, our Proofpoint system, that says, in the last 24 hours or whatever, we quarantined the following emails that came to your account. And if your quarantine emails are anything like mine, almost everything in there is garbage. It's bad stuff, it's stuff I don't want to see, don't need to see. It's just not legitimate email traffic. We've got that tuned in pretty closely. Now, if there is a false positive, if for some reason a real email message that you really needed got trapped in that filter, you can always bail it out of quarantine. That's very easy to do. But we've got that dialed in pretty good, and I haven't heard too many complaints from anybody about false positives. We also scan the attachments as they come through because that's one of the places where most of the bad stuff happens. So if the system detects that there's a bad attachment, it again will quarantine that. If for some reason it's a false positive, you can always bail it out, but it won't get to your inbox and create problems for you. And then the other thing we do, and we just started doing this recently, is looking for accounts that get compromised and are used to launch spam attacks from our server at other people. And usually the way we can tell is by the number of emails from a single account in an hour. If it's more, so for instance, our student services organizations often send large numbers of emails to students to remind them about deadlines or any number of things. But typically speaking, it's generally not more than about 700 per hour. And so if we see a mailbox that is exceeding that number of emails per hour, we capture that traffic, and then the person who sent it gets notified. And then if they say, oh yeah, I sent that, I was sending a graduation announcement to all of our students who are eligible to graduate this spring. That was me, yep, go ahead and send it. Then it'll release those. But if it's not, then you know something's gone wrong with your email account. You can let us know and we can help you fix that. So we're doing a lot of that kind of stuff to make it easy for people to fix those things when they're legitimate or false positives, but when they're not, we kind of stop that bad stuff from happening. The other thing that happens is people will get an email that says, oh, I need you to click on this and give me your username and password. And if you accidentally go there and it's a known bad site, we'll stop that and say, are you really sure you want to go there? This is a known bad place. You probably should think twice. And it saves a lot of people from making that mistake. Now, if it's a false positive, you can say, yeah, I know where I'm going. I meant to go there. This is what I need to do. And you can go ahead and go. But if you weren't sure, if you weren't paying attention, or you didn't really mean to click on that, it gives you that second chance to go, okay, saved. I'm out of here. We do penetration testing. This is something we just completed a couple weeks ago for this year. What essentially a penetration test is that we hire good guys who pretend to be bad guys and attempt to break into our systems. And they use all kinds of tricks and tools that criminals would typically use to try to break in. They use brute force attacks. They use known vulnerabilities in systems that we have. They use social engineering. They use phishing. They use all kinds of things to try to break in. And then they report back to us and say, this is what we found. We tried to break in, and we weren't successful over here, but we were successful over here. And that gives us a lot of good ideas of what we can do to go fix those things. So some of them are really easy to fix. So for example, one of the things that happens with some regularity is someone in some office on one of our campuses will get a new copier printer. And they'll put it on the network. And the technician from the company that brought the copier out won't set it up properly. And they'll leave it wide open. And so anybody can then get to that copier printer from anywhere in the world and use that as a jumping off point to get onto our network to do bad things. So we're redesigning some of our network to limit that, to make sure that all the copiers and printers go in a kind of a confined space on the network that doesn't allow for that kind of thing. But we're also then trying to work with the copier and printer vendors to say, okay, when you come to set one of these things up for one of our offices, do it this way. That way, it'll work the way they want, but it'll also be secure. So that's one of the things that we found from some of our penetration testing. And we'll do that on an annual basis to make sure that we're staying up to date with all the best practices in securing our environment. We're upgrading our identity management systems, so trying to make sure that they're as secure as possible. And for some of the really critical assets on our network, like the finance system or maybe some parts of the student information system, we're looking at exploring what's called two-factor authentication. So instead of just using a username and password, you might also have to put in another code that maybe comes to your smartphone or something like that if you really need access to the crown jewels, as we say. But we need to do that in a way that doesn't inhibit people's productivity, but also provides a higher level of security for really critical information on our network. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, and we're kind of piloting 3 or 4 of them right now to see which would be the easiest for us to implement and which would be the easiest for end users to work with on a daily basis. Recently, in fact in February, we implemented a new encryption methodology, so all of the information in our banner system, which is really our most important information asset, is now fully encrypted. So if someone broke into our network and got to our banner servers, unless they had a legitimate credential that they might have stolen through a phishing attack, they would be able to get to our database, but it would be fully encrypted. They wouldn't be able to do anything with that data. So that doesn't mean that it can't be stolen, but it makes it really hard to be stolen. So we've completed that in February. As I mentioned, we're segmenting the network in greater detail so that we can say, here's a group of devices that don't need to have access to Banner and could be vulnerabilities, so let's keep them physically separate or logically separate on the network from these things that they don't need access to. That will improve security. And we do that also with, I'm looking at the bookstore right here that has a series of point-of-sale transaction terminals. We've also segmented those onto their own logical network so nothing can get to them, which was the cause of the Target breach. So we're trying to learn from those large-scale security events that happen in other industries to say, well, what can we do in our environment to prohibit those kinds of things from happening here? As we look at things like penetration tests and other security assessments that we're doing on a more regular basis, we're coming up with other ideas of how we can continue to improve security. So for example, one of the things we're looking at is Banner account management. So when we implemented Banner about 8 years ago now, we provided a lot of accounts for people, assuming that they would need them to do whatever it is they need to do. Well, over the last 7 or 8 years, people have really come to a much better understanding of how they need to use that system, and they're finding that, you know, I really don't need that account. I can get what I need through self-service, through my portal, or from Argos, or from many other ways. So we're saying, well, if you don't really need that access, we're going to take that account away. We're going to shut that account down because that's one less door that a criminal can walk through. And it won't affect your productivity. It won't stop you from doing your job, but it will make us a more secure environment. So we're working through things like that to make sure that people, because more and more people are being targeted individually for cybercrime, we want to make them help them be less vulnerable. And then, of course, we're looking at providing some training for all faculty and staff. The California Community Colleges has licensed a really, really good information security training program that we're thinking about implementing here at Foothill-De Anza. It would take people probably about 45 minutes to go through and would give everybody enormously valuable information about how they can keep themselves safe and keep the district and the colleges safe. So we'll work through that with our information security team over the next couple of months, maybe have some kind of announcement in the fall. We've talked about the cost of a breach and and how devastating that could potentially be for our district. So just to illustrate what that cost really could be, we follow an organization called the Ponemon Institute. They do, this is a nonprofit organization that studies information security across many, many industries, including education, but banking and healthcare and manufacturing and service organizations, and you name it, the agriculture, on and on and on. They track these costs of security problems globally and across multiple industries. And they publish an annual report that talks about, well, what do these things really cost people? I mean, because they cost real dollars. I mean, there are real dollars either being stolen or companies or institutions are forced to invest to stop dollars from being stolen. And so when there is a breach, what are those costs involved with that? Well, there are a couple things. There may be a notification requirement. You may need to send out letters to all the people that were affected and saying, hey, your information has been compromised and we are obliged to tell you that. Here's what happened and here's what we're doing about it. Generally speaking, if you have a breach, you typically offer that individual who's affected 12 to 24 months of free credit monitoring. That's kind of a minimum remediation tactic. And then, of course, you have to maintain some kind of ongoing communication protocol. So you have to set up a call center, whether you do that within your own organization or you contract that out. But people will call and say, hey, I got this letter. Is this real? What does it mean? What am I supposed to do? Maybe they're angry, maybe they're curious, who knows? But you have to have that communication mechanism for some period of time. You may also have some legal liability. You may have to pay additional costs to individuals to compensate them for this loss. You probably, at the very least, have to go through some significant system upgrades to make sure these things don't happen again, assuming that you know it happened and you know why it happened. And you may lose business. For a college or university, students may say, boy, I just don't trust those guys anymore. I'm going to go to the district down the street, or whatever the case may be. Or, probably not so much in colleges and universities, but you might stop, a lot of times people stop shopping at Target or stopped shopping at Home Depot because they just didn't trust them. Or they said, I'm only going to shop there when I have cash and I can pay by cash. So there may be an actual loss of business. But based upon the Ponemon Institute's numbers, they published in 2015, the most recent report, that the average cost per record to remediate a breach is about $217 per record. So if for some reason our entire database of students, faculty, and staff got compromised, and there's about 1.4 million Social Security numbers in that database, if all 1.4 million of those were stolen, it could potentially cost us over $300 million to remediate that. Well, if you think that our annual budget for this district is about $190 million, this is more than 50% more than our annual budget. So again, we have breach insurance, but I guarantee you that won't cover $303 million worth of liability. So, but would it be that much? Probably not. But that's how much it could be based upon what we're seeing throughout multiple industries and certainly including education. So what can end users do? So ETS is doing a lot more than we've ever done, and it's taken a lot of our time and effort and a lot of money to make sure that we stay safe. But what can all of our individual friends and colleagues do? Well, first and foremost, never, ever, 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 ever share your user ID and password. You just keep that to yourself. That's your credential for your job function. Keep that to yourself. If someone else needs access to a system and they don't have a username and password, then they should get their own username and password for that system, or they shouldn't be in it if they're not supposed to be. So never share that with a student assistant, with an intern, with a temporary employee, with a colleague. Just keep it to yourself. Beware of phishing scams. We talked quite a bit about phishing scams. Keep in mind that a reputable organization, your bank, your health insurance provider, your employer, we will never contact you via email and ask you for your username and password. We never will do that. Categorically, we will never do that. So if someone sends you an email, calls you on the phone, and says, I need your username and password, I guarantee you it's fake. It's fraudulent, it's criminal. Hang up and let us know. If you get tricked, if for some reason, it just looked really real, or I wasn't paying attention, or I was so busy, or I thought it was an email from Marty or whatever, and you accidentally put your username and password in, change your password immediately. Tell us, of course, please tell us, but whatever you do, change your password immediately, because that is the best defense, is just going in and changing that so whatever it was that you got tricked out of won't work anymore. Beware of social engineering scams. So again, make sure that you know who you're talking to. Whether you're talking to people on email, on the phone, or in person, make sure that you really know who that person is. And if it's a legitimate ETS person, they will always have a staff ID tag on. They will always have a staff ID tag on. It will identify them, picture, name, and title. And even for our student employees, we're going to implement this same kind of thing. So if someone shows up in your office and says they're from ETS and you don't recognize them and they don't have a badge, call the police. They're probably fake. Use different passwords. Don't use the same password for all your stuff. So if you have a password that you use at work and a password that you use at home, that's a great start. If you have a password that you use for home email and use the same password for banking, maybe not such a good idea, so use different passwords for different systems. So if for some reason one of your passwords got compromised, it wouldn't be the keys to the kingdom. It would only open up one thing, and it would at least limit the damage if something were to happen. Use strong passwords, things that people can't guess, like your dog's name or your cat's name or your favorite child's name or what have you. Use passwords that have 8 characters or more. Use upper and lowercase. Some systems that you go into actually require these kinds of things. They don't let you put in passwords that don't meet some of these criteria. Others, you can put in anything. Use numbers in your password, and also use special characters like a period or a comma, or probably not a slash, but any of the special characters will usually work. Some systems don't allow you to use special characters, but they'll tell you that. But if you can use special characters, that's a good security practice. Change your passwords frequently. Here at Foothill-De Anza, we require all employees and students to change their password once a year on the 1-year anniversary of their last password change. We've stopped publicizing that because what we found is that criminals were watching that email traffic and they were timing criminal activities around our password change and pretending to be IT staff here at the district. So we stopped publicizing our our password change policy, and it just happens now. But most people are pretty used to it, and we don't have a lot of problems with that now that we've been into it for a couple of years. Report suspicious activity immediately to us. So if you see something crazy on email, or you saw something weird on one of our web pages, or somebody showed up in your office, or somebody called you or something, and it just doesn't seem right, it's probably not right. So let us know. If it's legit, I'm sure we'll know, and we'll be able to help you with that. And maybe we need to do a better job of letting people know we're going to be working on this or changing that or whatever the case may be. But we can also then correlate multiple events across the district, because usually these things don't happen in isolation. Usually multiple people are affected, and if we can kind of connect those dots and see where these things are happening, we can defend against them better, and then when it's appropriate, we can bring law enforcement into it if they need to be. And more they need to be, because these are bad people doing bad things, and we need to protect ourselves against that. At the very least, we need to inform other law enforcement organizations like Treasury Department, FBI, Department of Justice, because they keep track of this stuff, and they do a lot of this stuff goes across state lines and things of that sort that fall into federal jurisdiction. And then finally, I would say follow these same practices at home, because more and more people are doing work from home. They're accessing email, they're accessing student information system, they're accessing course management system. So if you're safe at work but not safe at home, you're probably more vulnerable than you're aware of. Also, I would highly recommend that you all have antivirus and anti-malware applications on your computers at home. A lot of the good ones are free, or you can get a free version. And so, for instance, in the malware world, I use one called, actually use two. I use one called Malware Bytes, and that's free. You can pay $20 and get the premium version, but all that really allows you to do is schedule regular scans, and you can just do it manually, and it's free. There's another one called Super Anti-Spyware. That's free. Both of them are different. They both catch different things. They both work great. They're both free. They both are made for Mac and Windows. You can get those. And certainly there's good antivirus out there that's free. You can, the one that comes to mind that a lot of people use that's free is called AVG. And again, you can get the free version, or you can pay for the $40 premium version, and it gives you a few extra features. But you don't need the paid version to get the benefit of the virus scan. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. It's all free, or usually free, and it can keep you safe at home.